أمار على عبد ضربني من ضربته للقاع ذبني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Dear respected brothers and sisters and dear viewers of Imam Hussein TV, and welcome back to our continuation of this Fatemiyah series in exploring the importance of Fatemiyah and its relation to our Shia identity. Tonight we're going to move on to the khutbah of Fatimah al-Zahra alayha salam, when she spoke to the oppressors and voiced her concerns and voiced the will of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih as they went against her husband and the Amir of her time, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Joining me again is none other than our respected Sheikh Vinay. Assalamu alaikum Sheikhna.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Now, Sheikh, the past couple of nights we've spoken about, firstly, trying to, from the other side, trying to balance between Fatima and Abu Bakr. And then we went on to speak about her relationship with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Now, I want to move on to the khutbah of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. Because, for example, with the khutbah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih, we tend to pick out only highlights when it comes to the khutbah of Ghadir. Can I have some of the highlights, and for the viewers as well, some of the highlights of the khutbah of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam in Medina?
I would say the khutbah can be divided up generally into two or three parts. The first part is theological. It describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet, and even some of the ahkam of Islam. And the interesting part of that introduction is it almost becomes a segue, not almost, it is a segue to what is discussed later. She first establishes Allah's attributes, the Prophet's attributes, and her connection to that. So her identity as being the spring of La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. So she begins with describing the attributes of the Prophet, that he came to root out jahal, to bring knowledge to people. And another interesting point of this, of the entire khutbah, before I want to go further, because there's a thought in my mind I wanted to say, is there's very little in this khutbah where she talks about herself. Most of it is about Allah and the Nabi. That if you love Allah and you love the Prophet, this is it. It's not if you love me, about me, Fatima. Of course, it is her haqq. But it's so interesting. We see this in the letters of Imam Hussein alayhi salam as well. When he was writing to the people of Basra, writing to the people of Kufa, always it's about Allah, the religion of Allah, and the religion of the Nabi. Or the religion of Allah and the Sunnah of the Nabi. What Sayyidah Zahra is doing, what Imam Hussein alayhi salam is doing, are implementing the religion of Allah and the Sunnah of the Nabi. It's not about them per se. What makes them so important and so great is that they are the best representation of the message of Allah or of the revelation and the Sunnah of the Nabi. That's what makes them so great. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what Shiism is. And if you look at the khutbah carefully, I think that that's a lesson that someone would learn right away. Then from there, moving on to the accusations really towards the community that they have abandoned her rights. That they have abandoned not only her rights, but the memory of the Prophet himself. She uses verses like وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيْ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. This is a verse, a very great verse in Surah Al-Shu'ara condemning the mushrikun, the polytheists. She's using verses like this and speaking to the companions of the Prophet. And there is also the theme there in this khutbah of the abandoning of the Quran. So there are different themes that we see throughout this. Then there is a theme of the intimidation factor. So there was some kind of bullying that was going on in the city of Medina. And this is a lot worse than, schoolyard bullying. Schoolyard bullying is terrible, of course, but this is a kind of bullying at a very high political level. It almost reminds me of how, and we can talk in more depth, but I'm just kind of giving you a kind of outline and then we can go through it. How when Parliament, even in the US or other countries, when they want to get votes, they can intimidate, blackmail, exploit people in order to get them to vote for their party. So let's say they have a bill and they'll say, well, we know this and this about you. If you don't vote for us, we're going to expose it. That's kind of what was happening in Medina. It would seem that Sayyidah Zahra was alluding to some pretty widespread nefarious behavior that was going on, almost mafia-like.
Wow.
Or you could say political mafia, whatever, but intimidation, extortion, things like that.
Now, in that khutbah, one thing that, of course, is I think looked down upon is arrogance. Okay, now, if I was to be arrogant, then that's looked down upon. And if I was to describe myself, for example, if I was to describe, let's say, or if a person, any person would describe their virtues and say, I've done this and I've done this and I am this and I've given charity, they would seem arrogant. How would Fatima Zahra alayhi salam describe herself in that khutbah? Was there an element of arrogance in it, or was there an element of this is now the reality?
Well, of course, there wouldn't be an element of arrogance in it. They may have perceived it as that way, sure, because their souls, they had sicknesses in their hearts. They didn't want to be corrected by someone that's younger than them. One, by a lady, and two, by someone that's younger than them, much younger than them. But she says in there, she uses the Arabic pronoun nahnu, ta'atuna, imamatuna. For example, she says, our obedience, our imama, our leadership. These are the words that she uses, right? That if you follow us, you'll be protected. Yani, amnan min al-firqa. That you'll be protected from disunity. You'll be given dignity in religion. You'll be given security through obedience to us. So she clearly includes herself in the group of those to whom obedience is due. So she's not just speaking on behalf of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she's speaking for herself also. As a God-given, legislated right. It's not a matter of arrogance or no arrogance, it's a matter of this is what it is. Yeah. So when the Imams, salamullahi alayhim, speak about their own authority, they're simply speaking about what Allah has already given them. There is no debate. So there's a difference between how a ma'asum is permitted to speak, perhaps, and how a non-ma'asum speaks. For example, a marja' or a great alim would not say obedience to me, would not use words like obedience, ta'a. They would say to Islam, and these are what the teachings are. But that would come across as arrogant. Now, if somebody didn't believe that she was ma'asuma, that she was a proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the one in whose heart is zayg and swerving and impurity towards Ahlul Bayt, they may take it a different way.
Interesting. Now, in that khutbah, was she, let's say, open about the other side's position within the community, and, for example, let's say their position in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors upon them? Did she mention any of that?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that you are Muslims. You are blessed to be Muslims. You are blessed to be followers, to claim that you're followers of the Prophet. You're blessed to be those that are followers of the Quran. Walakin today, you have thrown this Quran behind your back. Today you have done kufran of the greatest ni'mah. You have rejected that greatest ni'mah. So she becomes the fulcrum, or the furqan, between the community's allegiance to Allah or their abandonment of their covenant and their oath with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yes, they were Muslim. But today, what is the quality of their Islam, she's saying? If any, at all.
That's interesting. Now, Fatimah Zahra alayhi salam, at the age of 18, not seen much of her father. Because at the beginning of her life, her father would be tortured by the Quraysh and then moved to Medina. Did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa at any point sit Fatima, take her to the side, tell her, listen, my daughter, this is what's going to happen to you after I pass away? Or did he just leave it oblivious for her to find out?
No, we have riwayat where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam describes what will happen to her after his death.
Where is the tradition?
We have a riwayah in Kamil al-Ziyarat of Ibn Qulaway, and some other places as well, but I know Kamil al-Ziyarat, there is a riwayah from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who's narrating from the Prophet, that when the Prophet went for his night journey, for Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj, he was informed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about the different things that would happen to his ummah and to his family. And among them is very clear that humiliation will enter the home of Fatima, that she will not find anyone to protect her against her enemies on that day, that she will have a child and the child will be miscarried because of the violence. So it's pretty powerful. So the Prophet, we have a genre, I guess, of ahadith, not I guess, we do, of ahadith that foreshadow events to come.
Okay.
And this is one of them.
Now, does that, for example, the ahadith that foreshadow events to come are ahadith that we are informed of by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Imams, narrated to them by, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Jibreel alayhi salam. Does this have anything to do with, let's say, the nature of the tragedy of Fatimah Zahra alayhi salam? Is it something that's godly, or is it something else?
No, I mean the nature of the tragedy of Fatimah Zahra alayhi salam is devastating. It's a murder, right? We're talking about, at least as this is how Shia see it, as 12er Shia see it, and I would say Ismailis as well see it this way. It's a murder of the daughter of the Prophet, or at least most 12er Shia see it that way. It is a murder of the daughter of the Prophet, which is foretold by Allah Himself, that this is the grand expression of ingratitude towards Allah's blessing upon this community, which is the Quran and the Nabuwah of the tragedy of Sayyidah Zahra is it's cosmic, because we have traditions of the Prophet describing it in that way. And her screams and her cries and all of these things, it's cosmic.
Now, I want, for the viewers out there, I want us to go through the events of Fatemiyah, the events of the tragedy of Fatima Zahra, step by step. And I want us to start from Saqifa. I want you, Shaykhna, to allow everyone to imagine that they were there, basically. Walk them through what happened. Starting with Saqifa, what do we know about it?
So, after the death of the Prophet, a group of Ansar gathered in Saqifa to appoint a new leader of the Muslim community. Now, there was differences among them, and it would seem that the Ansar were supporting Amir al-Mu'mineen, in fact. Some of them from the Ansar. There was debate among them. At that point, Umar found out about what was going on. He entered the situation and insisted that if we don't do something now, there will be fasad in our amr. That our applauding and what we've decided that we want to do is going to be taken away. So they essentially bullied everybody, convinced them to appoint Abu Bakr as the Khalifa of the Muslims. We know that initially, early on, the Ansar had a soft spot for Amir al-Mu'mineen, but there were other people that were being discussed. It wasn't only Amir al-Mu'mineen.
Oh, okay.
But there was essentially a coup d'etat took place. That they came in the situation, took over, said, let's appoint Abu Bakr as being the Khalifa. It was done in a very rushed manner. Meanwhile, Amir al-Mu'mineen was burying the Prophet. This is over. Now a conflict is stirring. Because...
Between who?
Between Banu Hashim and Abu Bakr and Umar. And their followers.
Is this while Amir al-Mu'mineen is burying? So is
it's
it
after.
someone...
Everything, the dust is settled now.
Okay.
New leader has been appointed.
Okay.
And this conflict erupts, which already existed. Yes, see, we have to remember there was tension between Banu Hashim and the family of Abu Bakr and others, and perhaps Umar as well, during the time of the Prophet. Not perhaps Umar. Yes, there was. Now this spills out and comes out again after the death of the Prophet. There was tension between Aisha and Fatima Zahra. I mean, by tension I mean Aisha's mistreatment of Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha. Not tension as if the two are equally to blame, na'udhu billah. Of course not. Between Aisha and the other wives of the Prophet. Umar, of course, telling the Prophet, Hasbuna kitabullah, the book of Allah is enough for us, you're not in your right mind, all these things. So we have to look at all this background, right? Now there seems to be a very big difference of perspective, at the very least, between Banu Hashim and the Muhajirun, the other Muhajirun, like Abu Bakr, like Umar, like Uthman, and their followers. This spills out into what happens after the death of the Prophet.
Wow. I'm just trying to think. I'll save the thought for later. Can you provide me with some sources of Islamic history that us Shias take about these events? Because we hear it on Minbar all the time. Fatemiyah, this happened. What are the sources?
So there is the source Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais, which is debated, though I may say. So we have to be a little careful with this one. There is a debate about the book, whether it's authentic, whether it's not, whether it's reliable, whether it's not. Then we have some of the riwayat that are in Kulayni's Al-Kafi. We have historical sources, like such as the history of Yaqubi, the history of Mas'udi, the history of Tabari. We have other sources like Iqt wal-Farid. We have Balaghat nisa of Ibn Abi Tayfur. We have the Tabaqat al-Kubra of Ibn Sa'd, which we've already referred to, which describes some of the brewing of this conflict between Fatima al-Zahra and the early community. We have other riwayat in Bukhari, in Muslim, in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, again describing a conflict between Abu Bakr and Umar. Between Abu Bakr, Umar on one side and Fatima al-Zahra and Amir al-Mu'mineen on the other. And then we have later sources as well. These are some of the earlier sources that we have. We have some indications in the works of Sheikh Saduq, in the work of Sheikh al-Mufid, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. But it's debated whether that work al-Ikhtisas is from Sheikh al-Mufid or from another muhaddith contemporary to him. Then we have later works such as Al-Ihtijaj al-Tabarsi, or we have before that, the work of Dalal al-Imama of Ibn Rustam al-Tabari. Again, some of these works is debated as to who the authors are, but we know they're early Shia sources of Shia muhaddithin. And then going forward, there's numerous sources. So there's a lot of sources out there. And the riwayat that deal with these subjects are in the hundreds. And they've been really well enumerated by people like Abdul Mahdi Zahra in Hujum, in the work entitled, I think, Hujum ala Bayti Zahra, something to that effect, like the attack on the house of Fatima. The late Sayyid Ja'far Murtada al-Amili, his work as well enumerates things. The work of Sayyid Mahdi ala Kharsan. There's numerous works to this effect, yeah.
Now,
these are contemporary works which talk about the past.
Yeah, sure. Sheikh, the madlumiyya of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam is unanimous amongst all Shia. All Shia believe that she was madluma, she died a madluma, she was martyred. Do you think that there are some Shia who take it to the extreme with regards to Fatimiyah?
I don't know what that extreme would look like per se, but I would say an extreme may be in saying that this is exactly what happened to her. This is exactly how she was assaulted in this exact way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And any divergence from that script is a bid'ah. Because if you look at, for example, the tragedy of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Salamullahi alayhi, Abu Abdullah, there are many variations of the maqtal of Imam Hussein, and the narration of Karbala is so widely reported through so many different asanid and chains of transmission in so many different texts that it's something that all the Muslims agree upon. Yet there are differences. Who killed the Imam? Who was there at his final moments? What was the exact nature of his death? We know that he was killed by execution, by decapitation. But, what happened in Karbala exactly? We have a lot of information, but there's differences in the maqatil. There's different riwayat.
No, but for example, for the maqtal, are you talking about the asnad that come, or the chains of narrations that come from our imams? Because as we know, there were two imams present after Karbala happened. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam had been martyred. We know that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam and Imam
Yeah.
al-Baqir at a very young age
Yeah.
were there
Yeah.
on the day of Ashura. Are we talking about transmission from them, or are we talking about transmission
Both.
from journalists from the enemies?
Both.
Ah.
Both. So both journalists from the enemies, both from them. I mean, what do we really know from the journalists of the enemies? I mean, a lot of this information, again, I'm not putting doubt on it, comes from later historians, right? Who compiled the information from that time period, who relied on, let's say, people like Abu Mikhnaf, for example, or others. So, you know, a really good source on this would actually be Ibn Sa'ad's Tabaqat, because he provides like, I don't know how now, I mean, at least 5 isnads for the Maqtal of Imam Hussein, going through different people. And then, of course, we have the description in the Amali of Sheikh Saduq from Imam Zayn al-Abidin. I believe it's in the Amali of Saduq or Tusi. I believe the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. The narration of the Maqtal of Imam Hussein from Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. And then we have later riwayat of Imam al-Sadiq, of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. And then we have historical reports. We have so many different works. But the point is, getting back to Fatemiyah, we look at all this literature about Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi, and the tragedy of Hussein, and the Ansar of Hussein, and the ladies of Hussein. And there's differences. How could there not be differences about the tragedy of Lady Zahra, about an event that one is way more controversial because of who it involves? The vast majority of Muslims would say Yazid is mal'un for what he has done. Nobody would have a problem in narrating the events. Not nobody, but very few people would have a problem in narrating the events of Karbala, at least today. Even in the past, there were people that didn't have a problem with it. Some did, but that's a different story for a different time. Now, what happened to Fatima to Zahra salamullahi alayha, especially the things as they pertain to the physical attack and conflict, are mired in different layers of narratives. But what we can pull from that is something very tragic and very sad and profoundly terrible happened to her.
Because when I asked you about the narrations, whether they came from Imam Zayn al-Abidin and Imam al-Baqir alayhim salam, or they came from the journalists of the enemies on the day of Ashura, is because I want to know, for Fatemiyah, are the riwayat that have reached us, are they coming from Ali ibn Abi Talib, Salman, Abu Dhar, Miqdad, or are they coming from the opposing side?
Oh, well, both. Again, we have both. We have riwayat from Imam al-Sadiq describing the martyrdom of Lady Zahra. We have riwayat from Imam al-Hasan. We have riwayat from other Aimma salamullahi alayhim. I don't recall all of them now, but certainly from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. We have the ziyarah of Fatima to Zahra. We have the description of Fatima to Zahra in Kulaini, I believe from a riwayah from Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, from one of the Aimma describing her as Maktula Shahida, murdered and a Shahida. So how? She's a martyr and killed. So how did it happen? She's a Shahida, she's a martyr. How did it happen? We have to go into this. So we have riwayat from Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhim describing the martyrdom of Lady Zahra. What I'm saying is, do we have the exact, can we say that there is only one narrative describing her death in the exact manner, whether it was a nail that went in her, whether it was, whether they, na'udhu billah, hit her with their hands, hit her with the whip. For example, Sheikh Tusi in Talkhis al-Shafi says that it's reported that she was whipped. Sayyat. Yeah, Sheikh Tusi is not an unknown person. Sheikh al-Ta'ifa. He was the Sheikh of all the Shia for a couple of 100 years. People were doing his taqleed or so. The founder of the Hawza of Najaf, the school of Najf al-Ashraf. The writer of Tahdhib al-Ahkam and al-Istibsar, two of the four of the Kutub al-Arba'a, he says in Talkhis al-Shafi, there is no doubt about this event. We have consensus as Shia on this. There is no opposition among us on the fact that she was martyred. And he says that it is also narrated that she was whipped. Now Sheikh Tusi rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, would he come up and make a statement like that on behalf of the Shia from nowhere? Because this follows what Saduq has said.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah. And it follows what Sheikh Saduq has already said. So some claim, well, Sheikh al-Mufid had doubts about the whole event and stuff. I don't think he had doubts of the entire event. I think he had doubts of the book of Sulaim ibn Qais, of the form in which the book reached him. I'm not entirely sure if Mufid doubted the entire martyrdom of Lady Zahra, or what we really know about Sheikh Mufid's exact position about this. What we do know is that his student Sheikh Tusi, who was also a student of Sharif al-Murtada, clearly believed in this, that something very tragic occurred.
Because I think in Sheikh al-Mufid's Kitab al-Irshad, the hadith that they mention, the ones who obviously place question marks on the Madlumiyya of Fatima al-Zahra, is that he mentions the children of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and he said, had there been a Muhsin, or if there was a Muhsin or something like that, then there would be this number, not the number that he just mentioned. And then he says, Wallahu a'lam.
Yeah, because for Mufid, when compiling Al-Irshad, he even doesn't insist that there's historical evidence for all the Imams being martyred.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean,
yeah.
So, you know.
Well, it puts into perspective now.
Mufid, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, that did not mean that he doesn't believe it. He's saying,
of course.
based on the evidence that he has used to compile this specific book, Al-Irshad, he doesn't see the evidence in how he's compiled Kitab al-Irshad. But when you go to other works like Kitab al-Jamal, you find other details there about
it's very
things.
clear in there, yeah.
So you can't just choose one book of Sheikh al-Mufid and say, this is a ra'i of Sheikh al-Mufid. We're not entirely sure what his exact ra'i is, and I haven't studied all of his works on this issue to say conclusively either. But what we do know is Sheikh al-Tusi, and I would venture to speculate Sharif al-Murtada as well, Alam al-Huda, as his teacher. Definitely, believed that Lady Zahra was madhluma, and that Lady Zahra was subject to some kind of physical attack. This was their belief on the basis of the athar and the riwayat and akhbar that reached them.
Now you mentioned they're unanimous in their belief of the attack. Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam was martyred 6 months after Rasulullah passed away, give or take.
Give or take, there's different riwayat. Yeah.
Different riwayat, give or take. Were there multiple attacks on the house of Fatima and Ali, or was it just one attack?
Abdul Mahdi Zahra indicates that there may have been multiple attacks. It's actually a very good book, but maybe inshallah someone will be able to translate it, or if I get the tawfiq to translate it, inshallah. It's about the attack on Lady Zahra's house. It's quite a in-depth work. It's got a lot of, and he mentions that there could have been 2 or 3 attacks on the house.
As in of the same severity?
Of different kind of severity, yeah.
Okay.
Because when we look at the riwayat, there's different variants of the attack, right? Some have them dragging Amir al-Mu'mineen out. One of the other sources, Tafsir al-Ayashi as well. Ayashi has a narration about this as well, about the attack on the house of Lady Zahra. Some have an incident where Omar meets Lady Zahra in the road or somewhere outside, and he kicks her and slaps her. And Imam as-Sadiq says, it is as if I can see her earring flying from her ear. So that's another kind of attack on her. So it's possible, Abdul Mahdi Zahra indicates in his book, this is again an important work on the subject, that there may have been multiple attacks on her, or on the home at least. And then there's a riwayah in Baladuri that just states that they came to the house with a flame. So it may have happened in stages, it may have been one, it may have been multiple attacks on her.
Now these are all Shia sources, correct?
No,
Are there any?
they're Shia and Sunni sources. We like Baladuri describes Umar coming to the door with a fatila, with a flame, basically saying that if your father was here, he would have done what I'm doing today.
What?
Yeah, Baladuri, one of
If
the
your
great
father was
historians,
here-
Sunni historians.
If your father was here,
Yeah.
he would have done what
هذا
I'm doing.
أقوى بما جاء به أبوك. يعني this is stronger than even what your father brought.
Oh my God.
Something to that effect, basically. Yeah, like basically Rasulullah is with me on this. You know, he'd be disciplining you.
That's her father. You're not her father. Oh.
Can you imagine? This is a level of audacity and arrogance. Now, of course, Sunni or a non-Shi'i or someone who respects the Umar ibn al-Khattab would be thoroughly offended by this, of course.
Yeah.
But the question is the question that I would pose here, going back to the issue of sources, going back to the issue of Muslim memory, Ahmad bin Yahya al-Baladuri was an Abbasid historian. Okay? He compiled a book called Ansab al-Ashraf, which is biographies of the famous personalities of Islam.
Okay.
He also has a biography of Abu Bakr, largely all positive things about Abu Bakr, because he believed in the Imam of Abu Bakr, or in the leadership of Abu Bakr. It would seem to be so. He was a historian. He included these details, which means that until today, these details could have been edited out. Why haven't they been?
True.
They're not in the hands of Shia, they're in the hands of non-Shia, these sources.
Exactly.
Meaning it's a part of Muslim memory, the collective memory of Muslim historians. As a part of that collective memory is some kind of attack or dramatic encounter between the companion to the Prophet and the Lady of Light, Fatima Zahra. Now, whether the sanad is authentic or not in Baladuri, from a perspective of ilm al-hadith, is a different story. This can be debated. We can't say that all these isnads are authentic. Like every single reporter is connected to one another. Every single reporter is considered thiqa and trustworthy, or so on and so forth. But then the question that I would ask, when Baladuri was compiling Ansab al-Ashraf, was that his methodology? Or is it a collection of what he thought was authentic material of the Islamic history, of the past, based on the earliest sources that he had access to, which we don't have access to today? So it is still, nevertheless, a very early source, and two, a representation of Muslim memory. And the same we would say for Yaqubi, which has a little bit more Shi'i leaning, certainly. So, and Tabari as well, when talking about it, Abu Bakr saying, I wish I never opened the house of Fatima. You can't just dismiss these sources and say, oh, these are sources from the formative period of Islamic history, which have included and kept within them the memory and details of a tragic and violent encounter of some sort between the companions of the Prophet and the daughter of the Prophet. That can't be denied. Now, based on 20th century, 21st century developed hadith analysis, or even from the 7th, 10th century, so to speak, of hadith analysis, perhaps they could go back and say, the isnad doesn't add up, we can't develop certainty from this. Sure, that could maybe be debated, but are these historical sources subject to that kind of inquiry? Or can they be also seen as a repository of a very early Muslim memory, which is based on very early sources?
Yani Sheikh, you come out with something new every single day, something surprising every single day. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this third episode. Inshallah, my dear brothers and sisters, tomorrow night we will discuss why all of this matters. What's the point? Remembering something that happened over 1400 years ago. Inshallah, join us tomorrow as we continue with this fascinating discussion about Fatemiyah and its importance in relation to our Shia identity. But from me and Sheikh Vinay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أمار على عبد ضربني من ضرب الجيش